It wasn't the dream of collecting passport stamps or the urge to run away from home that took me to Barcelona. Honestly, it was an impulse. One of those that pops up when routine threatens to swallow you whole. I've always been the type of person who prefers to plan every step, control every variable. But that year, the desire to reinvent myself was stronger than the fear of making a mistake. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like for more stories like this. My name is Matthias, I'm 23, I'm American, and I grew up in a small town in rural Ohio. My parents always worked hard to give me opportunities they never had. I chose to study literature, focusing on Spanish, purely out of fascination for the culture I learned from books, all very far from practice, and even further from the Catalan accent I never imagined I'd encounter. Even though I was studying languages, I was always surrounded by the same faces at uni, hanging out at the same coffee shops, hearing the same old stories. When the exchange program acceptance came, along with the butterflies, came the certainty. It was time to break out of my shell and just go for it. Oh, and if you also feel like sometimes you need a push to change everything, like this video and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you will surprise even those who think they've seen it all about living abroad. I arrived in Barcelona at the end of winter, way before the heat took over the plazas. The city's smell was an indecipherable mix of wet concrete, fresh-baked bread, and the sweet smoke from coffee shops. On the way from the airport to the place I'd be staying, I looked out the taxi window, trying to soak it all in. The centuries-old buildings crammed into alleyways, the colorful laundry lines hanging over narrow streets, the buzz of scooters speeding by, the musical murmur of the language I thought I'd mastered. My hostess, Dona Carmen, lived on the 4th floor of an old building in the Gracia neighborhood. The elevator barely fit 2 people and a suitcase. As soon as the door opened, I felt warmth fill my chest. Walls covered in old portraits, dark wooden furniture meticulously polished, a window overlooking a tree-lined street where, every morning, a baker would shout out specials. My routine quickly settled in. I'd wake up to the sound of cutlery in the kitchen, the strong smell of coffee wafting into the hallway. I shared the bathroom with Carmen, who loved correcting my Spanish while I brushed my teeth. After classes, I'd wander aimlessly through the neighborhood, trying unknown fruits, trying to etch memories into the tiny details. The taste of ripe tomato on bread, the thick accent of the vendors, the warmth of the sun reflecting off stone facades. It was all so alive, so different from the planned silence of my room in Ohio. At the end of the day, Carmen always waited for me with eager questions and funny stories about her past guests. It was impossible not to feel, in some way, welcomed, even so far from everything I called home. On the second night, while unpacking my books onto the small shelf in my room, I heard Carmen's voice calling from the living room. "Matthias, your roommate's here." Only then did I remember the roommate the university had mentioned, but about whom I had little concrete information. He walked in with an easy smile and the look of someone who'd seen a lot. Dark hair, watchful eyes, and a way of taking up space without asking permission. His name was Gabriel, 24, from California, also a Spanish student, passionate about photography and architecture. We exchanged awkward, shy greetings, but the ice broke when he made a joke about the absurd number of books I'd brought in my suitcase. It was Carmen who insisted on showing us to the room. A narrow door, old windows, and in the center, a single double bed, neatly made. We looked at each other, both too shy to mention the obvious. Carmen, laughing, said we were old enough to share a mattress, and that Americans just value privacy too much. As soon as she left, Gabriel joked, "At least it's not as cold here as in Russia, right? Imagine having to share a bed in a Russian winter." I tried to laugh, but inside I felt tense. No exchange manual talked about sharing like this, side by side, day after day, not with someone who, until then, was just a stranger. Despite the awkwardness, we decided not to make a big deal of it. We established, in an almost solemn tone, that an invisible line would divide that bed from that night on. I woke up hours later, realizing that sleeping would never mean the same thing for the next few months. Little by little, the routine shaped us together. Gabriel was 10 times more outgoing than I could ever be. It only took him 2 days to know the name of the baker on the corner, and the Wi-Fi password that Carmen had, until then, guarded like a state secret. He was the type to ask everything, stop to photograph irrelevant details in the middle of the street, a mosaic on the ground, an old poster, an old lady with a yellow umbrella, and, like any good Californian, he carried a pair of flip-flops in his backpack even in February. We started sharing small tasks. He'd make coffee, I'd get fresh bread from the market. We made lists of places to explore: Roman ruins, hidden cafes, bookstores, and makeshift attics. In the late afternoons, we'd sit together on the balcony, sharing the day's news, comparing our professors' accents, swapping stories about failed romances and hopes for the future. The invisible bed division became an inside joke. Sometimes we'd laugh, remembering how many times one of us seemed to cross the border during the night in restless dreams. Our late-night talks grew longer, deeper, and more irreverent. We talked about the fear of losing control, about the joy of getting lost in an unknown city, about the homesickness that insisted on popping up at the most unexpected moments. So, without realizing it, awkwardness gave way to naturalness. A bond formed almost by accident between a comment about the sunset at Park Güell and a philosophical discussion about the difference between loneliness and solitude. Not everything was perfect, of course. Sharing space means learning to negotiate all the time. Who showers first? Who gets which side of the closet? How much to trust with intimate secrets? Small frictions arose. Gabriel sometimes forgot to turn down his phone volume at night. I, on the other hand, took up half the room with books and notebooks. But the real conflicts lay on another, quieter level. I felt a growing discomfort, realizing how physical proximity changed feelings. At night, even exhausted, it took me ages to fall asleep, aware of the sound of his breathing next to me. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night from confused dreams, aware that time spent next to someone had become dangerous. Not in a threatening way, but in a new, intimate, uncontrollable way. Gabriel, in turn, seemed to wrestle with other ghosts. Some nights I'd see him staring at the ceiling, distant. Once, he confessed he was afraid of getting too attached, of complicating life, of messing up something that had started so casually. It wasn't easy to admit to myself. There was definitely chemistry there, even if nothing was said, nothing done yet. External obstacles also loomed. The city could be welcoming, but it had its own rules. The feeling of being a foreigner was constant. In class, I struggled to understand the rapid Catalan. And there was also the fear that Carmen might notice something different in our room dynamic. A childish fear, as if there was something to hide, even though there was nothing concrete to suspect yet. In that shared universe, every gesture gained meaning. The way Gabriel waited for me for dinner, the care he took in setting out my favorite mug, the discreet concern when he saw I was bothered after a tough day. Everything was possibility. Everything was risk. The exact moment everything changed was as subtle as it was inevitable. It wasn't on a rainy night or under the pretext of some romantic movie. It all began after a long day in the Gothic Quarter, when we wandered unhurried through the narrow streets, talking about everything and nothing. Among ancient facades and muffled laughter, we returned home exhausted, our legs heavy and our heads full of small discoveries. At night, while Carmen slept at the other end of the hall, we lay down, tired. The bedside lamp cast a warm glow in the room, creating an island of light in the sea of shadows. As usual, we exchanged whispered confidences. Gabriel commented on a photograph he'd taken that afternoon. A window reflection, he said. A portrait of what he felt, half his face showing, half hidden in shadow. In the silence, I noticed how close we were, almost sharing the same pillow. The smell of his soap mingled with the subtle scent of my moisturizer. The sheets, once a barrier, were now almost an excuse to touch skin, to feel the other's body with just the slightest movement of turning over. Our knees lightly touched. For a moment I thought about pulling back, but I couldn't. I felt the warmth of his touch, a jolt of electricity running from my calf to the base of my neck. The room seemed smaller, time slower. Gabriel whispered, with a rare hesitation in his voice, that he'd never felt so at home away from home. That was like a silent invitation. His breathing grew heavier. His gaze lingered an extra second on my face. The space between us, rigorously maintained for weeks, disappeared. He slowly raised his hand and touched my waist, with a lightness that was more a question than a certainty. It was as if the whole world was suspended in that gesture, waiting for an answer. I smiled, almost unintentionally, feeling an unexpected relief, as if I was finally dropping a weary armor. In silence, I just closed my eyes and moved a little closer. Nothing happened immediately. We just lay there, breathing together, side by side, feeling each other's pulse. It was more about what wasn't said than what was. But in that instant, weeks of tension transformed into something new. An anticipation, a desire almost palpable in the air, crossing every inch of skin as if everything was possible and nothing was forbidden. The warmth of the Barcelona night seemed to have concentrated between us. The sheet slowly slipped away as his hands explored delicately the territory of my body, so familiar, yet utterly unknown. There was no rush, no hurried or mechanical gestures. It was as if every touch was rehearsed, every inch of closeness awaited for weeks. Gabriel's fingers glided over my skin like someone reading an ancient poem, attentive to every pause and every curve, discovering subtleties I hadn't even known. The room filled with small sounds, the muffled rustle of clothes, ragged breaths, nervous laughter as our faces came so close they almost stumbled over each other. We fell into sync immediately, as if an invisible orchestra conducted every move. The lamplight drew soft shadows on his arms, on the features of his face, on his chest rising and falling slowly. Gabriel's touch was an invitation, and I accepted every provocation, every path taken, as if I was finally deciphering a secret language all our own. Our legs intertwined, and for a moment it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. He looked at me in a way he never had before, with the intensity of someone who wants to engrave that image in their memory forever. We exchanged long, lazy kisses, the kind that warmed the heart more than any blanket in a European winter. His fingertips drew an imaginary line from my shoulder to the palm of my hand, while I let out a low, grateful laugh. Time seemed to stretch there. Every sensation was a discovery. The smell of the shared pillow, the taste of the kiss, the warmth that spread like fireflies on a dark night. For a moment, all that existed was the now. Two bodies that finally allowed themselves to surrender to the desire that had been building up with every shared night, every whispered secret under the same roof. There were no grand declarations, no eternal promises in that instant, just the unshakable certainty that this was real. We ended up hugging, cradled by the discreet sound of the sleeping city. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. There, only the space our bodies occupied together existed. And for the first time, I didn't feel like running away or hiding. I just wanted to stay in that embrace for as long as I could. I woke before the sun, Gabriel's face peaceful beside mine, one arm wrapped around my waist, as if to ensure I wouldn't slip away during the night. I spent a few minutes watching the carefree way he slept, his forehead relaxed, a faint smile on his lips. It seemed impossible that just a few weeks ago we were two strangers, each carrying our own internal walls. The first feeling was pure peace, as if I'd found rest after a long journey. Then came the unease. What now? How would it be to live day after day, knowing that the invisible line had vanished forever? I tried not to think, just to enjoy the warmth of his body, the comfortable silence of that room that was already so much ours. When Gabriel woke up, we exchanged knowing glances and smiles, the kind that need no explanation. The atmosphere was lighter, as if an old tension had finally dissolved. We spoke little, but the tone was of those who already understand everything, even without needing to say it. Suddenly, the small rituals, making coffee together, sharing the bathroom, walking side by side to the university, took on new meaning. But it wasn't all easy. The dynamic changed. Now every touch carried new layers. Every glance could be interpreted by Carmen or our exchange classmates as a sign. We had to learn to balance the desire to explore this new closeness with the caution of not turning the apartment into a stage for secrets. There was a quiet pleasure in keeping it just between us at first, but also a pulsating fear that everything could fall apart if exposed too soon. In the following weeks, our bond deepened. It was impossible to deny. Something had irrevocably changed. The silences at night lost their weight, giving way to intimate conversations and hushed laughter late into the night. Sleeping together was no longer just a matter of logistics, but a safe harbor where I anchored myself after intense days of adapting, studying, and homesickness. I started noticing small things. The smell of his t-shirt mixed with the scent of the sheets, the careful way he'd leave coffee brewed and waiting for me in the morning, the discreet touch on my shoulder when crossing a busy street. I felt genuine happiness, but also a silent dread that all of this might have an expiration date, that at the end of the semester, we'd each be pulled back to our own lives, continents apart. It was during these times that introspection caught me off guard. In the quiet of the shower, I thought about everything I was experiencing, how much crossing the line on that mattress had taught me about trust, about surrender, about vulnerability. One night, I wrote in my journal, Barcelona taught me to share space, body, and heart in a way I didn't know was possible. Gabriel also seemed to have his moments of reflection. I caught him looking at old photos one night before bed. When I asked him what he was thinking about, he simply replied, I never thought sharing a bed would teach me so much about myself. And deep down, I knew exactly what he meant. Neither of us expected that physical closeness, forced by circumstance, would turn into a soul connection, but it did. The invisible line had disappeared, but in its place something much bigger emerged. Recognition, partnership, and the strange certainty that, however improbable it seemed, this was the beginning of a story that would change my life. The semester slipped through my fingers without me even noticing time pass. Before we knew it, the afternoons were longer, the cafes packed with tourists. Carmen was airing out the house with wide-open windows, and final exam notices started appearing on the university bulletin boards. It felt like we were submerged in this parallel universe we'd created together, and suddenly the surface was nearing, calling us back to the breath of real life. The last days in Barcelona took on a different weight. Every trip to university became a premature farewell. I noticed the pattern of the sky through the leaves of the neighborhood trees, the flower seller who already knew my name, even the worn stones of the sidewalk leading to Carmen's building. Gabriel also seemed quieter, as if weighing every word. It was impossible not to feel time running out, the invisible countdown hovering over our breakfasts and our nightly silences. My relationship with Carmen also changed. She, who at first kept a discreet distance, gradually became a counselor, a confidant, almost family. I sensed a silent understanding in her eyes about what was happening between us. And, though I never dared to speak openly, I felt she approved. Some nights, Gabriel and I would help with the dishes. Others, Carmen would invent secret recipes just to see us laughing together. She'd say things like, "There are bonds that even the ocean can't break," and I'd respond with an awkward smile. But inside, I felt she knew everything. As the end approached, conversations about the future came, loaded with uncertainty. What would become of us two from then on? Gabriel would go back to California, I'd head to Ohio. The abyss between the cities seemed like an ocean. I weighed all the questions. Would it be possible to carry on what we'd built? Would it be fair to try, knowing we each needed to pursue our own lives, our own dreams, our families on opposite sides of the country? Still, it was impossible to ignore. What I felt for him was more than a phase, more than the side effect of an unforgettable trip. The nights before our departure turned into confessions lasting until dawn. We were honest with each other for the first time, shedding the masks of forced optimism, admitting our fears. Gabriel told me, his voice hoarse, his eyes glistening in the dim light, "I don't know how it'll be, but I want to try. I don't want to forget this story for anything." I felt a lump in my throat. I just replied, "If we don't risk it now, we'll spend the rest of our lives wondering what if." We decided then and there, in that bed that had become a symbol of everything that had lived between us, that we would continue together, even long distance. We promised visits, calls, letters, promises that seemed fragile in the face of reality. But they were all we had at that moment. Saying goodbye to Barcelona was a mix of celebration and sorrow. We organized one last special night, just the three of us. Carmen cooked her most famous paella, scattered candles on the balcony, opened wine, and toasted to what she called friendship that blossoms in difference. Dinner was long, punctuated by memories, laughter, and some disguised tears. Carmen took a photo of us, a little blurry, but it became my good luck charm on the way home. As I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, Gabriel breathing softly beside me, I understood that some experiences cut so deep, they never leave your skin. At the airport, the separation hurt more than I'd expected. Carmen's hug was tight and warm, with the strength of someone saying, "See you soon," knowing it might be goodbye. Gabriel held me tight, lingering a second longer before letting go. There were no grand speeches. Just the silent certainty that we were trying something rare, giving a chance to the improbable, defying borders, turning longing into a bridge, not an abyss. On the flight back, I looked at Barcelona one last time from the plane window. The red rooftops, the bright blue of the Mediterranean, the promise of a reunion postponed but not forgotten. I mentally retraced every step of that journey. The nervous arrival, the bewilderment of first contact, the slow melting of barriers, the unexpected discovery of love where I least expected it. I felt a mix of anxiety and hope, knowing that, from then on, nothing would be the same. Distance didn't matter. What we lived couldn't be confined by labels or calendars anymore. It was, above all, a choice. To stay, even when it would be easier to leave. Time felt weird when I got home. The first few days back were strangely quiet. Everything seemed smaller, more predictable. My parents asked about the trip. Friends wanted to know about the parties, the food, the sights, but no one could grasp what had truly happened to me. The experience had transformed me in layers I couldn't even explain properly. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel and I kept in touch. Morning texts, evening video calls, stories about our new old routines, now seen through a different lens. I received letters and postcards from Barcelona, each with a photo, a memory, a piece of him that made me feel close even miles away. I learned firsthand that longing is cruel, but it's also a sign that something was truly worth it. Time kept passing, and the promises were kept one by one. We visited each other during holidays, each reunion a mix of awkwardness and familiarity. We changed together, in a way. We became more patient, learned to navigate silences, to respect each other's time. The distance wasn't easy, but it wasn't insurmountable either. Every message, every call, was a renewal of our commitment to keep building, even little by little, even from afar. Slowly, I realized that what Barcelona left me with wasn't just a collection of photos or sharper Spanish skills. It was something else, a lesson without a diploma. I learned to open myself to the unexpected, to lose the fear of discomfort, to see value in the small acts of courage in everyday life. I realized that sometimes life offers a unique chance to reinvent yourself. You just need the courage to accept it, even without knowing what comes next. Gabriel and I continue to be, first and foremost, partners by choice. We choose to see each other whenever possible, even when the logistics seem impossible. We choose to adapt to limitations, laugh at the absurdities, cherish every reunion as if it were the first. And, over time, we started looking to the future together. We talked about living in the same city, sharing an apartment again, restarting our routine in a new place. We didn't have all the answers, but we had the desire, and that was enough at the time. Going back to Barcelona, visiting Carmen, became a ritual. Every time I walked those same streets, I felt a lump in my throat. Her apartment was still the same, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, old photos on the walls, the double bed still made up for guests. We'd sit together on the balcony, recounting old stories, looking at the saffron-colored sky at dusk. Every time I remembered, it was in that cramped space, in that unlikely routine, that I learned to surrender to the improbable. Sometimes, friends ask how I met someone so special in such an unexpected context. I answer with a smile. I went to share a room in Barcelona, and ended up sharing a life. Because deep down, the great lesson that city taught me was this: that the biggest discoveries often happen in the least obvious places, in the most uncomfortable situations, in the encounters we almost miss out on for fear of the unforeseen. If I could leave a message for those watching now, it would be this: if life puts you in a bed that only fits one more, don't try to shy away. Embrace the unexpected. Maybe that's the beginning of your best story. So, if you enjoyed this journey and want to follow other stories that only real life can write, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments what was the most improbable moment that changed your path. I guarantee, every great adventure begins when you agree to go off script. Barcelona gave me more than fluency in another language or an international diploma. It gave me the courage to be, to feel, to start over. It gave me love, friendship, and a new meaning for the word home. It was there, in Carmen's cramped room, between coffees, laughs, and goodbyes, that I learned. Sometimes, all we need is a little less space and a lot more surrender.